Chapter 12. The Archive of Lost Names. The wind at the edge of Holloway's abyss smelled of cold iron and something older beneath it, something Alira could not name but recognized in her teeth. She had the signal reader spread across her knees, its faint blue glow the only light she dared use this close to the outer rim. The device was no bigger than an open book, but its antenna array extended outward in 6 jointed arms, each tipped with a resonance filament so thin it sang in crosswinds. She'd built it herself 2 years ago for a purpose she no longer remembered clearly. Or rather, a purpose she had refused to let herself remember clearly. Survival mechanism, clinical distance. She knew her own tricks. The filaments were singing now.
"It's not going quiet,"
she said. Myra was crouched 3 feet to her left, one boot heel pressed against the last solid lip of stone before the world simply stopped. Below them, the abyss. Not a canyon, not a shaft, something worse than either. Holloway's under-island had been excavated centuries ago, carved hollow by successive waves of colonization and collapse, and what remained was a vertical darkness that dropped through the island's guts and continued below the floating rock itself, into open stratospheric air, a column of nothing suspended in nothing. Engineers called it the throat. Locals called it other things. Myra wasn't looking at Alira's reader. She was looking down.
"How far?"
she asked.
"I don't know yet."
Alira adjusted the 3rd filament, rotating its tip a fraction. The signal shifted, tightening. She felt it before the instrument confirmed it, a warmth along the back of her hand, the kind that didn't come from the air.
"Further than I hoped. Closer than I feared."
"That's not an answer."
"No,
Alira agreed.
it isn't."
The signal was Sienna's. She was as certain of that as she had ever been certain of anything in 5 years of false certainties. She'd spent the last 4 hours in the derelict pipe station behind them, cross-referencing the resonance signature against every reading she'd taken from the crystals Myra had found, against the degraded fragment they'd recovered from the outpost 2 nights ago, against the single measurement she allowed herself once a year from the cold-locked crystal in her laboratory on Kalora. The frequency matched. The decay curve matched. Even the harmonic overtone, that particular trembling quality that she had always privately thought of as Sienna's laugh encoded in light, matched. Her daughter's consciousness was not gone. It was here, below them in the dark. She made herself breathe before she spoke again.
"The Archive of Lost Names,"
she said.
"It's real. The Mnemosyne Council listed it as legend, regulatory mythology, something to frighten technicians out of improper disposal. But the signal doesn't lie."
She tapped the reader's center panel. A map resolved, crude but functional, built from the resonance topography. The filaments were drafting in real time.
"It's at the lowest navigable level, below the processing warrens, below the old crystal mines. There's a vault designation that doesn't appear in any public record. Vault Kef."
Myra pulled her gaze from the abyss. In the blue glow, her face was stripped of the guarded sharpness it usually wore, and what showed underneath was something younger and more tired.
"Kef?"
she repeated.
"What does that mean?"
"It doesn't mean anything, in any language I've traced, which means someone made it up, someone who didn't want it to be findable."
Alira paused. The warmth on the back of her hand had spread to her wrist. She turned the reader so Myra could see the map.
"Kiran's been keeping them, not just Sienna, all of them. Every memory he publicly preaches against. He's been extracting them from his followers and filing them here, instead of destroying them."
Myra stared at the map.
"Why?"
"I don't know."
And that was the part that sat in Alira's chest like a stone, because she had thought she understood Curran's pathology, understood it clinically, had even written a 3-page psychological profile of him in the sleepless night after she saw the access system logs, and the profile said nothing about preservation. It said obsessive severance, compensatory control, survivor guilt transference. It did not say, secretly keeps what he claims to burn.
"I don't know why he's keeping them, but he is, and Sienna is among them."
The wind gusted. The filaments sang at a higher pitch for a moment, then settled. Myra drew a slow breath through her teeth.
"When I held that first crystal, the one I found during the storm, the gold one, I saw a girl.
Yes.
She was laughing. Running, I think. It was brief, I don't relive them. I just sort of see the surface.
Myra rubbed her palm against her thigh, a gesture Alira had begun to recognize as discomfort she wouldn't name aloud.
She looked happy.
She was.
Alira's voice did a thing she didn't plan. It went very quiet and very level, the way her voice always went when she was working hardest to hold something in.
She was 7. We had been to the Bloom Festival, and she'd gotten the sap from a bioluminescent flower on her hands, and she couldn't stop laughing about it because it made her fingers glow. She ran along the railing of the observation deck, and I kept saying, "Sienna, Sienna, slow down."
She stopped. The stone in her chest was quite heavy.
That was 3 weeks before the experiment.
Myra said nothing for a moment. She had the quality, sometimes, of knowing when silence was the correct answer, and it was not what Alira had expected from a 17-year-old who communicated mostly in blunt declarations and half-finished questions. It made Alira trust her in a way she hadn't planned on trusting anyone.
So she's down there.
Myra said finally.
In that vault. Her whole mind.
Fragmented. The scatter pattern suggests trauma dispersal. When a consciousness shatters during an extraction, the pieces don't all land in the same place. They drift toward each other over time, like crystals seek resonance. 5 years is a long time to drift.
Alira looked at the map. The vault marker glowed a dim, steady amber.
But the clustering is good, better than I had any right to hope. Whatever Kiran's done to preserve them, it's worked.
He preserved her.
Myra said, and the flatness in her voice wasn't cruelty, it was precision. She was working something out.
The man who tells people to burn their memories has been sitting on your daughter's mind for 5 years.
Yes.
That's not someone who believes what he preaches.
No.
Alira said.
I think he believes all of it and none of it, simultaneously. I think he's been trying to save people from something he couldn't save himself from, and the contradiction has been eating him alive for years.
She folded the reader's antenna arms back in, one by one. Careful, methodical, the same way she handled everything breakable.
And I think that whatever happened the night Sienna disappeared, Kiran has been carrying it as a wound he can't sever without killing the part of himself that still remembers loving her.
That last word hung in the cold air. Myra let it hang.
He knew her.
She called him uncle.
The word cost her something. She paid it and moved on.
It was a long time ago. We worked together, we grieved together, and then we disagreed about everything that mattered, and the disagreement turned into something uglier. And by the time Sienna was 4, he was already building the early structures of what would become the Unburdened. But he came by the laboratory. He knew her.
Myra was quiet for a long moment, looking at the spot where the stone ended and the dark began. The abyss breathed. That was the only word for it. A slow upwelling of colder air from below, as though the throat exhaled on a rhythm.
The vault.
Myra said.
Vault, Kef. How do we get there?
Alira pulled a second document from her coat, not a technological document. This one, but paper, actual paper, stolen from a Holloway engineering cache she'd accessed 2 days ago while Myra slept.
There's a service corridor network built during the second colonization era. Predates the current infrastructure by 60 years, which means it predates most of Kiran's security architecture too. If he doesn't know it exists, and there's a reasonable chance he doesn't, the maps weren't digitized, then we have a route that's outside his watch grid.
She unfolded the paper. Age had made it soft, and the ink was faded to brown in places, but the corridor lines were legible. She traced one with her fingertip, a thread of passage that dropped from the Holloway mid-levels, narrowed through what the original engineers had labeled acoustic maintenance shafts, and terminated at a level marker she'd cross-referenced with her signal map. The match was not perfect, but it was close enough to be significant.
How narrow?
Myra asked, leaning over to study the map.
You'll fit easily. I'll manage.
That's not reassuring.
I wasn't trying to reassure you.
Alira folded the paper with the same careful attention she'd given the reader.
I was trying to be accurate. There's a difference.
Myra almost smiled. Not quite, but the corner of her mouth moved, which Alira had learned to count as the same thing. Then Myra looked back at the abyss and the almost smile faded. The glow from the signal reader was gone now, Alira having folded it closed, and without it the dark pressed in from below more insistently. Somewhere far below, impossibly far, farther than felt real, a faint violet sheen pulsed. Not regular enough to be mechanical, more like breathing.
That light.
Myra said.
That's the pulse?
Alira looked. The violet glow was very faint, barely a suggestion. But yes, she'd been tracking it in her peripheral vision for the last 2 hours, telling herself she was imagining it, and then telling herself she wasn't imagining it, but it was something else, some geological phosphorescence in the rock, some refracted stratospheric effect. But she'd run out of comfortable explanations.
I believe that's the unweaving device.
She said.
Or its test pulse infrastructure. Kiran's been powering it incrementally. When it reaches full charge, the broadcast will cover every island in the Lumen chain.
How long?
At the rate of increase I've been measuring, 3 days, perhaps 4.
Myra turned from the edge. She pulled her coat tighter at the collar. Not against cold exactly, her body had adapted to stratospheric temperatures in ways that suggested years of this work, but against something less tangible.
Then we don't have time to plan better than this.
No.
And the vault is the most dangerous place in Holloway.
Also, yes.
And the corridor route is 60-year-old infrastructure that may or may not still be structurally sound, in an island whose gravity systems are degrading.
Alira looked at her.
You're very good at summarizing problems.
Someone has to be.
Myra picked up her own pack from where she'd set it against the wall of the pipe station, swung it onto her shoulders with the practiced ease of someone who'd been carrying weight since she could walk.
I've been going into unstable structures my whole life. I know how they feel before they go. I'll take point.
Mira?
The girl stopped. Not because Alira had used a commanding tone, she hadn't, but because of something in the shape of the word itself. Myra seemed to understand that. Alira had not planned to say anything more. She'd planned to close the subject the way she closed most subjects, with a nod and a forward movement. Keep moving, stay functional. Emotion was something you dealt with later, and later had been accruing interest for 5 years. But she was standing at the edge of the place her daughter had been sleeping in fragments for 5 years, and Myra's younger brother was unraveling by degrees on a borrowed cot in Kailora, and the girl in front of her had offered to take point into the dark without being asked, without hesitation, and Alira found that she could not simply nod.
What you're helping me do.
She said.
You understand what it would mean if we find her, if we can reconstruct her.
Myra waited.
It means I've been wrong.
Alira said.
Not about the preservation, about why I was doing it. I told myself for 5 years that I was preserving memories because the data mattered, because the science demanded continuity, because human experience deserved a record, and all of that is true. But the reason I kept her crystal and never opened it and never let myself hear her voice from it.
The sentence was giving her trouble. She let it slow.
The reason was that as long as I didn't open it, there was a chance it was still full, a chance she was still whole somewhere, pretending to know and refusing to check.
Myra said quietly.
That's not science.
No.
Alira exhaled.
It's not.
It's what my brother does when he can't find me at the end of a shift.
Myra adjusted a strap on her pack, looking down at the buckle, not at Alira.
He sits in the exact same spot and doesn't move and doesn't try to find another place to wait, because moving would mean admitting I might not be coming to that spot. He's done it since he was 4.
She paused.
He still does it.
Alira did not say anything. She simply held that. The throat breathed again. Below, the faint violet light pulsed once, twice, then dimmed back to its baseline. The stratosphere wind moved across the edge of the stone with a sound that was almost but not quite music.
Neither do I.
Alira said. Myra looked up.
You said it before.
Alira said.
That if Jem died, you wouldn't want to forget him. I've been thinking about that since you said it. I've been thinking about what Kiran would say to it, that the forgetting would free you from the pain of loss, and that the pain of loss is the only thing that makes loss unbearable, and so forgetting is mercy.
She picked up her own case.
And I've been thinking that he's wrong. Not wrong the way a bad argument is wrong. Wrong the way a wound that goes too deep stops hurting, and you mistake the numbness for healing.
Myra stood very still.
I don't want to forget.
Alira continued.
I don't want Sienna back just so I can keep her safe somewhere I'll never open. I want her back so I can remember her properly, so I can stop
She looked at her own hands.
being afraid of what I'll feel when I do.
For a moment, there was only the wind and the dark, and the very distant violet glow.
Okay.
Myra said, her voice was rougher than usual. The cold, maybe, or something else.
Okay. Then we go down, and we get her.
Yes,
And whatever is down there,
whatever is down there.
Alira agreed, and she meant it as an acknowledgement of everything. The danger, the vault, the possibility of failure, the possibility of something worse than failure, the possibility of everything she'd spent 5 years holding at arm's length, arriving all at once in the dark below an island that had forgotten it was supposed to be afraid. Myra moved to the service hatch set into the pipe station's back wall and crouched in front of it. The latch was old and stiff, but it turned. Below it, a shaft dropped into the rock, with iron rungs set into one side, descending in a straight line until the light failed. She looked back once. Alira was already at her shoulder. The unweaving spire was not supposed to be visible from the abyss overlook. Alira knew this because she had studied Holloway's geography with the same focused attention she gave everything she needed to survive, and the spire stood at the far northern lip of the island, a full kilometer from the throat. It should have been lost behind the layered rock formations and the derelict processing towers. Should have been invisible in the dark, but the violet was not a beam. It was not a focused thing. It diffused through the stone itself, through the porous calcium-dense rock that Holloway was made of, glowing from within the island's skeleton the way a lantern shines through a closed fist. The whole northern quadrant of the island's underside had begun to pulse with it, and the color was wrong for anything natural. Too uniform, too deliberate. Myra had stopped at the service hatch but not gone in. She was looking at the light. Alira had been watching her watch it for nearly a minute, waiting, because Myra had the particular stillness of someone who wasn't done yet, and she had learned that pushing Myra before she was done was like trying to move water uphill. Possible, technically. Costly.
it's getting brighter.
Myra said.
Yes.
Since we've been standing here, it's brighter than it was an hour ago.
Alira looked at the glow. She'd been measuring it in her peripheral vision, tracking the increments without letting herself look directly, the way you tracked a deteriorating patient's numbers without letting yourself think about the patient. She hadn't wanted to say it aloud because saying it aloud would make it a fact that required a response, and she was already full of facts that required responses.
The charge cycle is accelerating.
She said.
I estimated 3 days based on the rate I measured this morning. The rate has changed.
Myra turned from the hatch. Her face was very controlled in the way it got when she was doing calculations she didn't like the outcome of.
How long now?
It was not a question. The inflection was flat, requesting data, not reassurance.
40 hours. Perhaps less.
Something shifted in Myra's jaw, just a small tightening. Then she nodded once and turned back to the hatch as though that settled it, but she didn't move to open it further, and her hand sat on the latch without working it.
Mira,
I'm fine.
I didn't say you weren't.
The girl exhaled through her teeth. The sound was short and controlled, the kind of breath that had learned to do a lot of work in a small space.
40 hours.
She said.
Jem's been alone for 2 days already. He has the stabilizers I left. He should have enough for 4 days.
She pressed her thumb into the edge of the latch, not pushing, just pressing.
But if Jem is having an episode when the pulse fires...
She stopped herself. Alira didn't fill the silence. She waited.
His memory fragmentation.
Myra said.
The tech damage. Whatever baseline he's got left that's still his, the pulse would take it. All of it.
She swallowed. The motion was small and visible.
He wouldn't know me.
The wind moved through the throat below and made the sound of something being poured from a great height.
He might not.
Alira said. She could have offered something softer. She chose not to. The girl had spent 2 days operating on accurate information, and she had not broken yet, and offering her a comfortable lie now would be a different kind of cruelty.
The unweaving is designed for intact adult neural architecture. What it would do to fragmented tissue, to someone already operating without full memory coherence, I don't know. No one does. Kiran's device has never been tested on a full population.
He's 9.
Myra's voice was absolutely level. That was the most frightening thing about it.
He's 9, and he's already lost half of himself, and you're telling me there's a device aimed at taking the rest.
I'm telling you, that's why we're going down.
Myra looked at her then, quickly, the way you look at something that surprised you by being the right shape.
That's why we're going down.
Alira said again.
Not only for Sienna, because if the vault contains what I think it contains, if Kiran has been storing extracted memories instead of destroying them, if the archive holds functional consciousness, then somewhere in it there is the architecture to understand what the pulse will do, and possibly the architecture to stop it.
She paused.
Or at least to limit it.
You think you can shut it down?
I think I can understand it well enough to interfere with it. Kiran built his device using principles he learned from my research. That is not arrogance, that is sourcing. I know the foundational logic he would have used because I wrote the foundational logic.
She held Myra's gaze.
He's been a better student than I expected, but I am not someone he designed the device to defeat.
Myra studied her for a moment, and Alira had the uncomfortable experience of feeling studied by someone considerably younger who was nonetheless doing it very effectively. The girl had a way of looking at people that made Alira feel like a memory crystal being held to the light, its content readable, its age estimable.
You've been thinking about this since the signal reader.
Myra said.
Since before that.
You didn't say any of it until now.
No.
Why not?
Alira considered several answers. She landed on the true one.
Because until 20 minutes ago, I hadn't decided whether I believed Sienna could actually be recovered. The signal was evidence. The evidence was persuasive. But persuasive evidence and genuine belief are not the same state of mind, and I was not going to ask you to take this risk based on something I only half believed myself.
She looked down at the pack in her hands. The cold case inside it held no crystals right now, nothing of Sienna's. Those were locked in the lab. The cold case held her tools. The resonance scanner, the frequency dampers, the 2 extraction filaments she'd modified for field use. The things you needed to pull a consciousness from where it wasn't supposed to be.
I believe it now.
Myra was quiet for a moment. The violet light from the north pulsed gently, like a slow heartbeat, and the reflected color of it reached them in the faintest wash.
I had a dream about him last night.
Myra said. Not the way someone says a thing to change the subject. The way someone says a thing because they've been carrying it and they need to set it down somewhere, and this is the only somewhere available.
Jem. In the dream he was fine. Not even sick. Just sitting on the edge of our shelter swinging his legs the way he does. And he looked up at me and said my name. Just Mira. Just my name. But the way he says it when he's not scared. The way he says it when everything is okay.
She stopped, swallowed again.
And I woke up, and I couldn't remember what his voice sounds like.
The admission sat in the cold air between them.
I couldn't remember.
She said again, and now there was something cracked running through the levelness.
I know it. I know what his voice sounds like, but I couldn't make it play in my head. For about 30 seconds,
She made a small, helpless gesture with her hand.
I just had nothing. And I thought, this is what Kiran promises people. This is what the unburdened calls mercy. And I wanted to find him and put my hands around his throat.
She said it plainly, without drama, which made it more convincing than drama would have.
You'll remember it.
Alira said.
When you hear it again, memory doesn't disappear in 30 seconds, not from healthy neural tissue. You were half asleep. The retrieval pathway was suppressed.
I know that.
Myra pressed her fingers briefly against her forehead, then dropped her hand.
I know that. I know the science. You've explained enough of it.
A brief pause.
It still scared me.
Yes,
Alira said.
it would.
Something softened incrementally in Myra's posture, the kind of softening that happens when someone stops waiting to be told they're wrong about the thing they're afraid of. Alira had noticed this about her. She expected correction. She received kindness with the slight wariness of someone who'd learned kindness sometimes had a latch on it.
He used to make up songs.
Myra said, quieter now, the rasp in her voice less guarded.
When he was small, before the tech damage got bad, he'd get a tune stuck in his head and make up words because he didn't know the real words, and he'd just sing it at me while I was trying to fix the gear or count our stock. Complete nonsense. Names of foods he invented. Complaints about his shoes.
A fractional smile crossed her face and left again.
I used to pretend it annoyed me.
Did it?
No.
The word was very simple. Alira looked at her. The violet light pulsed once, strong enough this time that their shadows appeared briefly on the stone before the glow receded. Myra's shadow was thin and straight. Alira's was wider, hunched slightly over the case she was holding.
Sienna sang.
Alira said. She had not planned to say it. It came out anyway, some trapdoor opening that the last hour had loosened.
Constantly. It drove me completely mad. She'd sing the same 4 bars of something over and over while she was thinking about something else entirely, and she wouldn't notice she was doing it.
A pause.
I used to close my office door.
Myra said nothing, but she was listening in the way she listened when she wasn't trying to respond, just receiving.
I would close my office door
Alira said again.
and think, just a few minutes without the singing, just a few minutes of quiet.
She looked at the throat, at the darkness below. At the faint amber warmth the vault marker had burned into her memory, that point of light on the map that meant her daughter's mind, fragmented and drifting, clustered in a room she had never chosen to be in.
I have had 5 years of quiet.
The words did not shake. She would not let them shake. But Myra turned and looked at her with an expression that held no pity, which was the thing Alira had most needed. Not pity, recognition.
40 hours.
Myra said.
Yes.
And the shaft goes down how far before the service corridor begins?
20 meters, then a lateral passage, then a descent in stages. The acoustic maintenance shafts are vertical, approximately 3 meters each, 4 of them in sequence. After that, the old mining level. From there, if the map is accurate, Vault Kef is half a kilometer west.
Myra did the arithmetic in her face. Alira could watch her do it, the slight movements of calculation.
2 hours in, if the structure's sound, more if it's not.
Possibly 3.
And then, however long the retrieval takes.
Everything we have goes into a formal report by tonight, in writing, copies held separately.
Alira tightened her grip on the case.
I've done extractions in controlled conditions, with full equipment, on intact crystalline matrices. I've never done it in a vault, in the dark, on fragmented consciousness distributed across an unknown number of shards, with no secondary technician and no containment backup.
So we're improvising.
We are being professionally flexible.
Alira said, and she heard, distantly, that the sentence had almost a dry edge to it, almost something that could have been a different kind of voice in different circumstances. Myra heard it too. The corner of her mouth moved.
Right. Professionally flexible.
She looked back at the hatch, then at the spire's glow, faint and growing in the north, then at Alira.
If I don't come back up.
She said.
Jem is in our shelter in the 3rd stratum of Calora, the one with the blue marker on the pipe. He knows your name now, I told him. I told him someone might come.
She said it the way she said everything practical, quickly, without ceremony, because ceremony would have been a concession that the thing she was describing might happen.
He responds to Mira's person. That's what he calls the people I trust. Mira's people.
Elira held her gaze.
You're coming back up.
I know.
Myra pulled her pack's chest strap flat and clicked it.
I'm just saying.
I know what you're saying.
Elira looked at her steadily.
And if I don't, the cold case has a secondary access code, 1147. The extraction tools inside can stabilize a fragmented crystal matrix without full technical knowledge if you follow the color sequence on the scanner. Green first, then amber, never touch red.
Myra blinked, then slowly she nodded.
We're both coming back up.
Elira said.
Yes.
Myra agreed, and she sounded for just that second like she might mean it. The spire pulsed again, and this time the violet didn't entirely recede. It held, a low, steady throb in the rock around them, in the stone under their feet, in the air at the edge of the throat, as though the island itself had begun to breathe the color of forgetting. Elira did not look at it. She looked at the hatch, and at Myra crouched before it, and at the iron rungs descending into the dark below.
I should have opened her crystal years ago.
She said, not to Myra, not exactly. To the air, to the direction the thought was already going.
I should have opened it and listened and stopped pretending that not listening kept her intact.
She exhaled.
I was a coward, dressed up as a scientist.
You were a mother, dressed up as a scientist.
Myra said. She turned the latch and the hatch swung open, and the cold below rose up to meet them, carrying the scent of iron and old stone and something faintly golden, faintly warm, that Elira pressed her teeth together against because she recognized it.
There's a difference.
She swung her legs into the shaft and caught the first rung with her boot and looked back up at Elira, just once, her face pale and certain in the violet-touched dark.
Come on then.
She said.
Let's go find her.
Elira crouched at the hatch's edge. Below, Myra was already moving, the sound of her descent a rhythmic scrape of boot against iron, getting smaller. The unweaving spire's light pressed at Elira's back, warm and wrong, a clock ticking in a color no one was supposed to see. She put her hand on the first rung. The iron was cold. Her grip was steady. Below her, in the dark, a girl descended toward a vault that held the scattered pieces of her daughter's mind. And above her, in the north, a machine swallowed its charge breath by breath by breath. Elira Voss let go of the edge and climbed down into the dark.